On AM 560, The Answer.
Get the latest weather, traffic, and news updates online at 560theanswer.com. Listen to AM 560 The Answer online at 560theanswer.com, on the AM 560 mobile app, on your Alexa-powered smart speaker, and on TuneIn, iHeart, and on Odyssey. If you're looking for the latest news, insight into what it means, and the sharpest opinion, there's only one station in Chicago where you can turn, and it's this one. We're AM 560, The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. Before we turn our attention to land war in Europe, just one more comment about what we were discussing before the news. Rick Bayless, celebrity chef, calling for federal relief for restaurants, lest the devastation be even more substantial than it's already been. We went through the numbers from Open Table, how much reservations are down in major cities in America, starting with Chicago, 55%, to San Francisco at 65%. And Bayless saying, nobody knows what to do. He's talking about restaurateurs in terms of how to keep their doors open. Well, just one point I didn't mention.
What?
Hey, Rick Bayless?
Yeah?
Maybe supporting vax mandates as he did, not such a good idea.
Good point. You reap what you sow.
There's been a lot of willing participants in their own damage, I'm sorry to say, in this era of COVID and COVIDian lordship. All right, switching gears, let's talk to our old friend John Bolton, former assistant to the president for national security affairs and U.S. ambassador to the UN, also the author of The Room Where It Happened, a White House memoir. John, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Glad to be back with you.
So, this confidential overture that Secretary of State Blinken made to the Russians that he mentioned earlier this week, hoping that diplomacy will prove productive and keep Putin out of Ukraine. One aspect of it that we haven't discussed much, and I wanted to get your take on, is how Blinken is folding in perhaps a relaxation of sanctions against Iran as a carrot for the Russians to stay out of Ukraine.
Well, there's a lot of, obviously, uncertainty about exactly what Blinken's up to, but I do think it's without question the administration for 1 year now has done almost everything it could conceive of to try and get the 2015 Obama nuclear deal with Iran revived, and giving away something to the Russians to get them interested might well be in the zone of possibility here. I mean, I think it's the propensity of the Biden administration to think that if they can just find the right thing to concede to Iran, the right thing to concede to Russia, the right thing to concede to China, that everything will be fine, is central to the problem. It just will increase the appetite of the potential aggressors. It won't appease them, to use that word.
It seems to me that there's a fundamental misunderstanding about Iran and this relationship between the Chinese, the Russians, and the Iranians. That the Russians and the Chinese want the same thing with Iran that we want, and unless we want those three countries to be the dominant powers in the world, then we don't want the same things, because that seems to be pretty clear from those three countries what they want.
Yeah, their relationship isn't entirely coterminous, but it's good enough for government work. The Chinese want Iran because it's an oil supplier. Of course, they want Russia for that reason, too. Iran stands against Israel and pro-American Arab states in the Gulf region, and that's a plus for them. So they've got a lot going there, and I don't think we seem to understand that. And, the administration listens to the rhetoric about Sergei Lavrov, Russian foreign minister, says we don't want war, and they take great comfort in that and say there's a sign of hope for diplomacy. Well, what did they think Sergei Lavrov was going to say? We want war? Of course he's not going to say that. And it's this naivete, this unwillingness to see beyond the rhetoric of Moscow and Beijing and Tehran, for that matter, that leads us further into trouble.
So we have the Olympics starting February 3rd. Do you think anything is going to happen before that? Because if Russia and China are, together, they don't want anything to take away, China doesn't want anything to take away from the world watching the Olympics.
Yeah, I mean, I know that's a theory out there. I also think it's a theory that the invasion starts while the opening ceremony is underway.
Oh.
I mean, this is something that I'm sure China and Russia are talking very closely about the interrelationship of these things. But to say, why don't you wait 2 weeks or so until the Olympics are over, is just not something Russia's going to agree to. If it doesn't suit Putin in terms of timing, sure, he'll agree to it. But if he thinks he needs to move sooner or during the Olympics, he will determine the timing. I just don't think there's any kind of deal on this.
Blinken also said earlier this week there's no daylight between the United States and our NATO allies. The story.
It's absolutely wrong.
Yeah,
it's just absolutely wrong.
And just one point, and then I'll let you respond. The story out yesterday that with over 40% of the EU's natural gas supplies under Moscow's control, European officials are now scouring the globe, asking for American help for shiploads to redirect to their countries.
Yeah, look, President Reagan warned Margaret Thatcher and other European leaders during his term as president, do not become dependent on Russia for oil and natural gas. And they didn't pay attention to it. And now we're suffering part of the consequences. The Germans, I think, are the biggest problem in the alliance, although the French aren't being terribly helpful. Nothing new there. But, you know, Germany, given history now, no country in Europe should be stronger against the violation of international boundaries with military force. No country in Europe should be stronger than Germany, and because of their history, and they are probably the weakest. They just fired their highest-ranking naval official for basically taking up Putin's line about Russia's treatment by the West. The top guy in the Navy just got fired. They have not committed, the Germans have not committed to sanctions on the natural gas pipeline Nord Stream 2 if the Russians invade. The State Department keeps saying they have, but if you look in Germany, they're very equivocal on it. And that's part of why Putin doesn't take Biden seriously. He's heard threats like this before. He heard threats like this in 2014 when he went into eastern Ukraine and annexed the Crimea, and he got away with minimal damage. And I think he may think he's in the same position today.
Well, don't you think Germany's going to sit this one out because they're reliant on Russia for natural gas and oil?
Well, that's a big problem, and as are other European countries. But I think more than that, it's just Germany doesn't want to get into a difficult situation with Russia. And so other countries that, you know, are inconveniently sharing borders with Russia, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, Hungary, Romania, are terribly worried about this Russian threat because it won't stop with Ukraine. And if the Germans don't realize that, you know, I think we've potentially got a serious internal NATO issue here. And Putin knows that, and if he can squeeze in there and make that split more painful, he will do it.
How much does our energy policy inform Putin's moves? You know, you've got the EU scrambling the world over for more energy. Well, the U.S. is in that position, too, because we've decided that energy independence here isn't such a great thing under this president.
Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely backwards. It's backwards for the U.S. economically, and it's backwards strategically, too. I mean, the Biden administration, one of its first foreign policy actions, waived sanctions on the Nord Stream 2 pipeline as it was shutting down the Keystone XL pipeline and saying, you know, you got to get rid of all this dependence on fossil fuels. That's a lot easier said than done. And the Europeans, and by the way, our Asian friends as well, would love to get more supplies of American natural gas and American oil, not be dependent on the Middle East, not be dependent on Russia, not be dependent on suppliers that are politically dangerous for them. So we've got this huge asset. It would have a very positive economic effect, and it'd be a major strategic alternative for our friends around the world.
We've heard differing assessments of the kind of fight that Ukraine could put up, the kind of damage it could inflict on Putin if Putin were to, you know, formally invade rather than to try to foment a coup as he's done in other client states. What's your assessment of what Putin is more likely to do?
Well, over the past 2 decades, he has substantially improved the fighting capability of Russia's conventional forces. Nobody should have any doubt about that. And it's also the case that he doesn't necessarily need or want an all-out, full-scale, total invasion of Ukraine to take control of the entire country. He might go in and only, use the words only in quotes, take more chunks of eastern and southern Ukraine, which is where more Russian-friendly elements of the population live. He might shoot toward Kiev from Belarus, where, by the way, the Russians have just put in significant new troop concentrations. Kiev's near that Belarusian border, and he might want to come right up to the gates of Kiev. In effect, the Russians did this in Georgia in 2008, approaching the capital Tbilisi before withdrawing. The Russians may think that'll help overturn the Zelensky regime. There are lots of variations on what Russia's options are here. And, Putin will be looking at what the potential cost is. But in terms of who would win that fight, there isn't any question who would win. The question is, how bad would Russia suffer if it launched a much larger operation than that minor incursion that President Biden sadly all but invited last week.
And your assessment, because again, differing assessments here on these overtures to, crippling sanctions is the term. It's not sanctions. It's always characterized as crippling sanctions. How crippling are the sanctions that the U.S. could impose in terms of, targeting Russian banks and freezing the assets of Russian oligarchs and maybe Putin himself? Is that something that's a part of Putin's consideration?
Yeah, I think we have the capability to impose really very painful sanctions. There's no doubt about that. The real question now is whether Putin believes it. We may be in a situation because of America's damaged credibility and the evidence splits in the NATO alliance that Putin simply doesn't think that Biden can follow through. This is the danger of miscalculation. And I think Putin's view right now is also informed by the withdrawal from Afghanistan, which was a catastrophic strategic mistake. Same view in Beijing. So Biden could be very serious about these crippling sanctions, but you could also have a situation where Putin doesn't believe it, and that could lead to hostilities.
He is John Bolton, former assistant to the president for national security affairs and former U.S. ambassador to the UN, author of The Room Where It Happened, a White House memoir. Ambassador Bolton, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Glad to be with you.
Thank you. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
Connect with Dan and Amy using the AM560 mobile app. Download it today at 560theanswer.com/mobile.
Wabtec U.S. Rail Incorporated